So, you're looking at a brand new book. It's called A Capital Scandal, Politics, Patronage, and Payoffs. And when we're talking about hot off the press, I think we're really talking hot off the press. It's only been out a month. It's written by Robert Fife and John Warren. And John Warren, it's really a pleasure to have you in Whistler here. And this is a brand new book. I'm going to give it back to you because I'm going to want you to read a little bit from it as we get going.
Delighted to be here, and delighted to be able to talk about capital scandal, because I think it's something that a whole lot of people in Canada, just about everybody who pays taxes, and I can't think of anybody who doesn't, is going to be very interested in.
I think it will be a capital scandal. Of course, the politics and the patronage and the payoffs and the things that go on in Ottawa concern us all as taxpayers. And some of the things that go on are practically, it's incredible that they aren't brought to light more often. This book, John Warren, of course, has worked for the Canadian Press. He worked for 5 different dailies, a long-time journalist, also with CBC Radio and TV. You're the parliamentary channel on TV. You were the host for as long as it was on TV.
Yeah, well, it used to show right here in Whistler. I was the guy who introduced the House of Commons every day and tried to explain what they were going to do. It was never easy to explain what they were doing, even on a good day, and try to explain sometimes why these things were happening. I was a little bit restricted in that, of course, because the idea was that I was to tell a story the way the House of Commons and the politicians and the House leaders wanted it told. And through the whole course of all of that, Jim, I also found out that the way they wanted the story told wasn't really the way the story ought to be told. That wasn't the true story or the complete story. So I've been filing this sort of thing away in my mind and in clippings and so on for years. And finally, when they eliminated that job, I felt my possible conflict of interest had been eliminated, and I could then say what I think is the true story of what goes on in Parliament.
That's one thing you did also, John Warren. You taught journalism at Carleton University. And how much is the press on Parliament Hill tied up by the government in power? In other words, you're saying if you wrote something or you came onto the parliamentary TV channel and perhaps were a little critical, the next time you went back to a source, they're not going to be wanting to talk to you. They'd rather talk to someone else, would they?
Well, there's no question about it. If you're trying to get access to politicians and find out the arguments behind a particular crisis that's come up, or the explanation for a particular announcement and so on, you get that story from the minister if you've been nice to the minister. You don't get the story if you've been critical. So there's an incentive there to be favorable in a lot of cases to the people that you have to rely on for your information. The other thing is, of course, that the media people in the press gallery use facilities that are provided by Parliament. A lot of their travel, certainly a lot of the space, the studios and so on, are paid for by the public. And so for the press to be terribly critical of parliamentarians for abusing the public purse is a little bit of hypocrisy, because they're doing they get a lot of things at taxpayers' expense themselves.
Well, sure, it must get difficult again that you don't want to burn your sources. But the CBC, when they did the budget cut, that was one of the first things that went, was the host on the parliamentary channel. 12 years you were involved in that production. Now it's a chance, as you say, that, well, if you're not involved in that, then you've got a chance to speak out a little bit.
Well, I had a chance to speak out, as I say. I thought any possible argument of conflict of interest was eliminated, and certainly this is a project of Bob Fife's and mine. It doesn't represent the CBC view of things, but the CBC felt that I'd overstepped the line, even though I'd done this in my own time, and they disciplined me for not getting their permission first, and they took me off the air. I was moved from my House of Commons job to a local radio job, where I did a sort of a community thing in Ottawa, no politics, whatever. But they've taken me off the air. I'm on vacation right now. I'm delighted to be here at Whistler. I'm delighted that we've gotten together, but that's not a CBC function, certainly. That's my own personal job.
No, okay. Before we get to the book, you're still involved a little bit, though, in Ottawa. That's your home. You is it consulting you do, or you've got a little paper that you put out? It's the Ottawa Hill Times.
Oh, I don't put it out. I'm a columnist for this newspaper, which is a newspaper that serves Parliament Hill, not just the politicians. We think of Parliament Hill as MPs and senators. Well, there are about 5,000 or 6,000 people who work directly for Parliament. And then there are all the deputy ministers and the lobbyists and the senior public servants and so on, who are very, very anxious to be plugged in on what's going on. So this little newspaper serves a community probably of 20,000 people, all of whom are very interested in what's happening with the personalities and the legislation and so on. And I write a column for them, and the CBC right now is reviewing the column to see whether they will continue to allow me to write it. And that again is done on my own time. So I'm having a little bit of difficulty somehow with dealing with my own employers on this particular matter of what I do with my own time.
Absolutely. Well, John Warren, the book is it's 12 chapters. It's 282 pages, so it's quite an undertaking, and it's just out. It's out in October. What kind of a reaction have you been getting out of Ottawa so far? Not just from the CBC, but I mean from some of the people that are involved in the book, particularly about the elected and the non-elected.
Well, very interesting reactions. One of the things is even among those in Ottawa who are much better informed, of course, about what goes on there than people in the rest of the country, shock and anger about just how widespread the abuses are, just how widespread the waste and the self-serving activities of the politicians extend. From the politicians, not a very much reaction, and this is kind of surprising. I think what happened is that a few weeks before this, of course, there was the Mulroney biography, which the Mulroney supporters tried to suppress, and they criticized the author and so on, and they had a terrible reaction, and everybody went out and bought the book just to read more about what was in it, and I think they learned from that, so they're not saying a whole lot publicly. We know they're very angry privately, but the other thing is, if they persuade people that there are excesses or exaggerations in the book, they're simply going to persuade people also to read it to see what else is in there, and they don't look very good.
Well, certainly not some of the bad publicity then ends up working to your benefit. Capital Scandal, I'm sure, is going to raise a few hackles. Some of the chapters we were looking at, the King of the Hill, well, you're pretty much talking about the Prime Minister. He is the king of the castle in Ottawa.
Well, there's no question about it. We're very proud of our democratic system, our parliamentary system, and theoretically it works well, and it has worked well in the past. But what's happened over the last really 20, 25 years is that more and more power and authority is being concentrated in the Prime Minister's office. And the Prime Minister is, and really this, we're not the first to make this contention, is really an elected dictator. Once he's in there with a majority government for 4 years, nobody can throw him out, as long as he can keep his own party people on the majority side in line. So the trick in running the country is to keep, in Brian Mulroney's case, keep the Conservatives all in line. In Pierre Trudeau's case, of course, it was the Liberals. We're not suggesting only Brian Mulroney and the Conservatives are guilty of this. But that eliminates the whole function of Parliament, which is to debate every piece of legislation and budget measure and spending measure and so on, to allow the representatives from across the country to make their constituents' views known and felt in determining what is then ultimately the best compromise for everyone. And that doesn't happen. Legislation is introduced and it's very, very rarely amended, and the people who are sent here as Conservatives vote for the government. The people who are sent from British Columbia as New Democrats and Liberals vote with their party. Very rarely do they ever stray from the party path.
Absolutely. I think there's quite a concern there as you think about it. You have an elected MP, and they go through all of the nomination process and the election and whatnot, and your MP gets to Ottawa, but all of a sudden he's up against the whole bureaucracy of again elected and non-elected people, and therefore he doesn't have as much input as you might think that he could have or should have.
Well, we point out that most of them go there with good intentions. They try very hard to do things, and they're told, no, just take it easy. We'll tell you when to vote and how to vote. Very, very often they don't know what they're voting on. They come into the House and they say, which way are we voting? They don't ask what the question is. The Conservatives vote this way. The Liberals and the New Democrats generally vote the other way. But they
strictly party lines.
Strictly party. The whip tells them which way they're voting. Or they see the person on their left stand up and they say, oh, it's my turn to stand up. No idea what they're voting on. So they get disillusioned. They may decide, I'm going to be on the committee on the environment, or I'm going to sit on the committee on communications because I have a real concern about that, and I'm going to work very hard on that. And they may work very hard on it for a year or two. Then a report is prepared. It's elaborate, it's detailed, it's submitted, and it's trashed. Right. It's not even looked at. So after a while, about 2 or 3 years, you get pretty darn frustrated. So you say, well, I'm not serving any real purpose going to all these meetings and participating in debates that nobody ever reads or listens to. What are the old veterans doing? And the veterans are traveling to London and Paris, and the veterans, and now it's becoming winter, and Ottawa's not a very pleasant place in the winter. They're looking over the Caribbean travel brochures. We're then paying to send them there, to Trinidad and Tobago or wherever it may be.
Well, that's certainly one of the chapters in the book, and you'd think that Canadian politicians would be more interested in traveling about Canada and finding out, of course, with the constitutional debates that we've been having. The guy from BC isn't necessarily going to want to go to Labrador.
Well, no.
Or the guy from Quebec isn't necessarily going to want to go to Prince George. You're thinking that perhaps more they're aligned for Hawaii.
Let me take a minute of your time to tell you just where these people have been going on your behalf, and you've been paying for these trips since 1989, and this is not a comprehensive list. This is just a sort of a highlights of the tours that they've taken. Uruguay, Mexico, Guatemala, Bermuda, St. Lucia, Dominica, Tunisia, Turks and Caicos, Trinidad and Tobago, the Philippines, Spain, Egypt, Yemen, Saudi Arabia, Switzerland, Iceland, Cyprus, Britain, Austria, Germany, Belgium, the Netherlands, France, Italy, Czechoslovakia, Poland, the Soviet Union, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, Yugoslavia, Morocco, Senegal, India, Hong Kong, Japan, Australia, Singapore, Malaysia, Zimbabwe, and New Guinea. Now that's some of the places that we have sent parliamentarians, not individuals, groups of them, with wives, with girlfriends, sometimes with kids, and they are broadening their horizons so they will be better able to understand international issues.
From particularly some of the warmer climates as it is the winter coming on.
Well, there's a definite seasonal trend to this. Obviously, January, February, and into March, they examine international affairs in the Caribbean.
Mm-hmm.
They don't very often go to the really deprived countries in Africa, which are admittedly warm, but also not very pleasant in many cases.
Maybe some of the perks aren't quite as good.
Yeah, and they don't have the little drinks with the umbrellas in them and stuff like that.
Well, also, John Ward, it's not just international travel, but we should touch on the fact that our parliamentarians nowadays have an almost unlimited budget to fly within Canada, not just back and forth with their own riding, but anywhere they want to go.
It's very interesting. It only about 30 or 35 years ago, MPs got enough money, they got a special allowance to go to Ottawa and back to their constituency during a session. This was gradually enhanced. It began really with the Trudeau, or with the Diefenbaker-Pearson years. They gave them a little more travel and a little more, and also staff and so on. But now it's at the point where they are entitled, without any explanation required, to travel 64 trips, round trips, to any place they want in Canada every year. Now you figure that out, that's more than one a week. Most MPs don't do it. Aha, they can use up the points because their wives can go, or their husbands can go. Their kids can go. Some of their staff can go. Their grandchildren can go. Their sons-in-laws and daughters-in-law can go. And of course, to arrange these trips, all of these people have free telephone privileges at all times, free mail privileges, of course, and all those other good things. And another little privilege, they can take pictures and have them framed at your expense. That's all done in the framing department of the House of Commons, which is distinct from the furniture department. The interior decorator, who is on staff and listed in the telephone book as an interior decorator, designs the offices and so on. The perks just extend. There's no end to the...
Yeah, certainly, and we're talking about an immense gravy train here that goes beyond just the perks, but also over the years we have to consider some of the inflated salaries and the pensions and well, big governments, big business, but we end up being the guy that's putting out the bucks to pay for all of that, don't we?
Well, they make the point, if you ever ask, that they make tremendous sacrifices to go to Ottawa to serve the public. Okay, the average school teacher, the average small business person, even the average lawyer may well make over $110,000 a year back in the job before they left, but most of them actually get an increased income for going there. Their pay is $64,000, but on top of that, they get $27,000, which is totally tax-free. Now, of course, at the normal tax rate for people at that level, that is equivalent to over $50,000. So $110,000 in compensation. Plus, everything is found. If you want batteries for your camera or your watch or your flashlight, they have that. They have the best photo equipment in every single office, photocopying equipment. They have fax machines. They have TVs and VCRs, both in the riding office and, of course, the constituency office, where they now have a secretary to look after things.
Well, I think I understand the argument there, John Warren, is that you know, you want to make the elected official as a certainly an attractive position so that you can attract good people to it. But I think as a capital scandal, as the book points out, that well, maybe they've gone a little bit too far with that. Now it's not just tracking good people on a certain level. It's all of a sudden, hey, this is a heck of a job.
Well, exactly, and you find that out because very few leave willingly. They have to be fired by the voters, and they'll fight desperately not to be fired by the voters. One of the real scandals in a capital scandal is the fact that by having all this additional staff, by having all these free flights, first class, and they wait in the first class lounge while they're waiting to get on these flights and so on, they're becoming more and more remote from the people they represent. The staff deals with the people who have complaints. The pollsters find out through their surveys what the public really is thinking, or they think they're finding out what the public is really thinking. The MP no longer serves even those functions of advising the Prime Minister, hey, out in my riding, this is really bad. And he says, oh, well, it can't be that bad.
We just have a poll
our
result.
pollsters have shown that nationally this is the case. And he says, well, that may be, but not in New Westminster right now, you know.
Absolutely. Another thing I wanted to touch on that, of course, very topical nowadays, but in the book there's a chapter called Sexism in the Slave Trade. And I think you're suggesting there that Parliament Hill remains pretty much an old boys club. There hasn't been as much changes in women's favor as perhaps everyone would like to think.
Well, this exclusive male preserve is eroding a bit at the edges, and that will continue, I think. But the staff, this is where it's really, really remarkable. Canada considers itself fairly enlightened in matters of labor law and so on. However, the people who work for MPs are virtually indentured slaves in the sense that they have no union, they work the hours they're told, they work for salaries that are very wildly. One MP may pay his people $15,000, and another one who has a favorite, maybe a niece, is paying $45,000 for essentially the same job. There's no scales. If they have complaints, there's no avenue for appeal. The one thing you can do is quit or get fired. And if in this day now that we're hearing about sexual harassment, for instance, well, where does a staffer of an MP go if she feels that she's being sexually harassed? She now has an avenue. She can go to the party whip, and you know what the party whip's going to say. That's another one of the scandals in a capital scandal that is, it's very much outdated. They have not kept up or caught up to even the 70s, let alone the 90s. You know.
Yeah, in those senses, I'm sure. Well, a chapter also spreading the word where you dealt with the media, Robert Fife and yourself, John Warren, of course, involved in the National Press Gallery for many years. What can you do? Again, if you burn your sources, then you've got a problem. Or if you come out with a book like a capital scandal, and all of a sudden you realize, well, the CBC, your employee, didn't give you permission, or you didn't ask permission to write it from them, so all of a sudden your hands are tied as well.
Well, you can run into trouble, as I have in this, and lots of other reporters have in the past. But I think what can be done, and what has to be done, is that the public itself has to demand accounting from these people. Find out, and you can go to your MP's constituency office and say, I want to know where my MP has traveled this year. And the next question is why? And the next question is, with what results? What was the point of all this? These people have to be made accountable. They're there serving us, not the other way around.
I think it's almost turned around that way sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
Once the situation presents itself that you can get away with 64 trips a year within the country, then away you're going to do.
Some wonderful examples. Marcel Mass, of course, is sort of the ultimate free spirit among the cabinet ministers. He's had 2 chauffeur-driven limos in the last couple of years because the first one had so much electronic gear and it caught fire and burned up.
Oh.
You know, we have the case of Senator Pat Carney, who was paid $20,000 for files that were destroyed. She was paid $20,000 for not writing a book, which is a lot more than I'm going to get for writing a capital scandal, I might add.
Well, of course, Pat Carney, one of our local BC favorites here, but...
we have some interesting cases. The idea of the double standard is probably best represented by the law that they tried to pass, which would have virtually prevented investigations by the police of members of parliament and senators, because it would have required the investigating officers to get permission and to give advance notice a month ahead of time, so all the evidence could be eliminated, before they actually conducted the investigation. And that got right up to the point where, with one exception, Sven Robinson, another BC member, who said, I think we better take another look at this, it would have passed the day before the summer recess when nobody was paying any attention.
Sure.
So much attention was then drawn to it because it was stalled that they had to revise it and back off a bit. But it really is astounding. Just a couple of little stories.
Mm-hmm.
A senator's secretary, who was a long-termer and had a good deal of influence, said she couldn't see properly out of her window. She had the whole office floor raised. She got it raised, and then she found out that there were pigeon droppings all over the window, and she didn't like
want
to
to
do
look
it.
at it anyway.
The senators also expanded their office essential equipment to include video cameras paid for by you and me, so that they can record their performances at home and improve their speech-making technique by reviewing the tapes.
Well,
and I suppose they might use a video camera to take the kids' wedding and the grandchildren's pictures.
Perhaps. I think you refer to the Senate in the book as a patronage heaven. That's when you've reached that level where you've...
It's a wonderful place to go because you never have to go to work.
That's true.
And you travel around the world. Is an interesting thing. Canadian senators are all often thought of internationally as the same as the U.S. senators, who are important people.
Elected.
They love to go on international trips because the senator from Red Deer, Alberta, may not be very impressive to his own constituents in Red Deer, but boy, when he gets on an international trip, he's really treated well. They keep demanding the same privileges, of course, as members of the House of Commons because they're also parliamentarians. You remember the famous $164 a day that they were going to pay themselves if they showed up for work.
Right.
And that was, in fact,
capital scandal, politics, patronage, and payoffs. We'll be right back after this break.
Loving you, and you don't know, you don't know, you don't know, you don't know how to...
Welcome back. We're with John Warren, who along with Robert Fife has a great new book out, A Capital Scandal, Politics, Patronage, and Payoffs. John, I want to talk about some of these suggestions in the book for saving the system, because it can't all be negative, and I think you put some suggestions into how we can kind of maybe regroup and save the system. Before that, a couple more examples of some of the fun things that happen.
It's interesting, of course, people who are writing a book are working at typewriters and word processors. We don't get to do the fun art stuff. We submit this book to the publisher. That's what he came up with as his concept.
Pigs at the trough?
The pigs weren't ours. The pigs were what the artists came up with after they'd read enough of it to get an impression as to what they wanted to show. The pigs, I'm afraid, are appropriate. The pigs, in fact, represent all kinds of behavior that the taxpayers don't know about. They're footing the bills, but they don't know. One of the problems is that they aren't told. These people aren't accountable in the sense that they have to reveal what they're spending money on. One example, double dipping is, of course, when you're drawing a pension from your House of Commons service or Senate service and have a salary job on top of it. That's the simple example.
This is called double dipping?
That's double dipping. We have several triple dippers in here. One of them's Ian Deans. It's always nice to get a new Democrat who's triple dipping because, of course, they condemn all kinds of greed and hypocrisy and conflicts of interest and that sort of thing. Ian Deans was drawing a pension from the Ontario legislature, got elected to the House of Commons, stayed there just long enough to qualify for a House of Commons pension, and then quit, claiming that he couldn't stand the government's greed and hypocrisy any longer. Of course, he quit to take a government job at about $130,000 a year. So he became a super-duper triple dipper, as we call them. Lots and lots of our judges are double dippers, at least double dippers, meaning they've served their term in the House of Commons, and as a reward for good, loyal service, they become judges, heads of boards and commissions. All these people drawing 120, 130, 140,000 plus their very lavish pensions, which most Canadians know are the most substantial pensions anywhere in the world. There's lots and lots of this stuff going on. We've got the names and the incidents and the specifics of this sort of thing. We have the Commons budget, the Senate budget, that give the figures, and they are, unfortunately, they're shocking figures, and they are indeed scandalous figures. Once again, the title and the pigs. You know, I'm allowed to flog this a bit.
Absolutely, John.
The title and the pigs are, I think, quite appropriate to the content. One of the things we talked about,
the public trough.
The public trough, and they're at it. One of the things we talked about earlier was about the travel. There's the domestic travel of 64 trips a year back and forth anywhere they want to go, for MPs and senators and their wives and their kids and so on. Then there's the international travel to the Caribbean and to Europe and Asia and so on. There are also trips that are provided by other very right-wing countries and leaders in places like Taiwan and Hong Kong and Cyprus and Turkey and Greece. These are provided by business interests, and they pay the shot to bring Canadians over there. Now, there are no reports ever filed. As a matter of fact, most of the Canadians who go on those trips never reveal that they've gone on them. Why are they being invited over? Just what is it that these other countries are getting out of our politicians? Maybe it's just because in Korea and Taiwan and Hong Kong they're good guys and they like Canadians and they want them to come over there. The suspicion is, of course, that they're getting something from the Canadian parliamentarians that we don't know about. And so we're not paying the bill directly, but we might be paying a whole lot indirectly.
Yeah, certainly with the influence and the lobbying that must go on. I mean, obviously they're over there talking about potential business deals that may crop up or may not, but there's certainly they're trying to influence the way that our politicians think.
Yeah, and that brings us to one of the most important elements of reform, and that is going public. They have to be forced to go public about spending, about what they're doing when they go on trips. And of course, one of the things that may result is that they won't go on as many trips because they might not be doing anything they want to tell us about. But if there is a reason to go to another country, then we should know what it is, and we shouldn't really have some of these very, very right-wing regimes paying to bring Canadians over there, and then our own population not knowing,
having no idea what the trip
was
about,
all about. No. So we've recommended certainly that there be accountability, that they have to be more open and straightforward about what the reasons are behind this, why they're spending money, and why they're doing these things.
And whatever some of the potential influence that might occur from some of these things.
Well, it may have to do with immigration. It may have to do with airline access to Canada from one of these other countries. We don't really know what. That's the point. I mean, maybe they're just going over there for amusement. They're given the sort of full hospitality treatment with wining and dining and girls, and we have a bit of that. Mind you, it's not a booze and broads kind of book, but
no.
We've got some examples of that, and for the people that are looking for a little of that, they'll get a bit of titillation there too.
Yeah, well, we're talking about openness, and I think everyone would totally agree that that's essential. Some of the other suggestions for trying to patch the old system together, get it rolling again?
The budget system has to be opened up. There has to be input from members in the preparation of a budget. You know, this marvelously secret process and so on and so forth that nobody but Michael Wilson in the last 7 years, and now Don Mazinkowski, but nobody at the finance minister knows a thing about what's in it. And of course, when Doug Small got hold of a copy of the budget a day before it was to be released, there was a huge investigation. The Prime Minister accused him of committing a criminal act. He went through a tremendous court process. It cost, incidentally, Doug Small and his employers $100,000 to look after his interests. When Sinclair Stevens, a cabinet minister, was in legal trouble, we paid his bills. Mm-hmm. But of course, we didn't pay Doug Small's bills to defend himself. There's another example of the double standard and the belief by the people we elect that they are in fact above the law. The rest of us have to pay our own expenses. But anyway, that budget process should have input from all the interest groups who may have something to submit. Make it open and debated beforehand. And sure, the government has the final say, but.
Let's have it open so that people know what's going on behind some of those closed doors.
They might even have been made able to make a real argument for the GST. If the process were open, they say, look, we need this money here, but not to do it and then just come along and present us with the bill.
Here we are. 7%, yes.
Seems that we're running just about out of time.
Yeah, we are. John Warren, get that book out again now.
Okay, I just love to show it around, and I think Canadian taxpayers, they won't necessarily find it pleasant reading, but I think they'll find it very valuable reading.
Okay, the book is published by Key Porter Books. Again, it's 282 pages, a good-sized book, and it's just out in October, so it's only been about a month off the presses. John Warren, how are things in Ottawa? Great to have you here at Whistler on a holiday. You're going to be all right when you get home.
I'll be going back. I don't really want to go back, but I will be going back, and I hope I'll be able to get out here again. It's a wonderful, wonderful place.
Alrighty, John Warren, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you at home for joining us. A very interesting show today, and it's great to have John Warren along.
Thank you,
See
Jim.
again next week here on Whistler Magazine.